So this video today is going to be a bit different. It's not going to be about CRTs or displays of any sort really much at all. Instead I've got a Crosspoint or Extron Crosspoint Matrix Switcher here, and I'm going to be mainly talking about the cabling to connect your consoles to these sort of devices. I'll turn it around and you see in the back this is a big one. This is a 32 input, 16 output, B and C affair. So I'm just going to push this away out of the way for now and talk about the cabling. So when you get a few consoles and you want to run them RGB, SCART RGB, you might go for something like that, like a SCART switcher. This one's a 4 input and 1 output. So that's all good and well when you've got handful of consoles. Once you start getting a few more consoles that exceed your switcher count, and they typically are around 2, 3, 4, 5, you might get a 6, you might even get an 8 if you're really lucky. Well, once you exceed your switcher, you might have to then piggyback your switches, use multiple switches, whatever, but it starts to get out of control a bit, and there's got to be a better solution. And I think going to the Crosspoint or a matrix switcher is the way to go. So I'm going to show you the cabling that I was using. I'll give you an example of what I was using to go to the, just bear with me a second while I grab it, to the matrix switcher. And the reason I'm sort of making this video now because it's convenient, because I've made all new cables. I made a lot of new cables. So this would be a typical of what I would use on the consoles in the past setup. So you got to get from the connector on your console to B and C's. Ultimately, that's what you got to do. And there are a few challenges to that. So let's just start on getting from one type of plug to the other. Let's not concern about signals and other things. But so all it is your typical PlayStation here, PlayStation SCART cable. This grey one goes into there. I'll get to this middle bit and then I'll talk about this last bit now. So this is a VGA to BNC cable, fairly common. I picked up quite a lot of them for a cheap price, various lengths, various genders. They're female, but that doesn't matter. Example's still good. So I'm going to make use of them in this cable setup of back then. Thing is, you've got to realise this cabling is expensive regardless. If you want to go sort of like Extron Crosspoint stuff, B and C, it's going to get expensive one way or another, and some compromises have to be made unless you've got a lot of money to do it. But so all I've really done is made this middle cable to join the VGA to B and C and the SCART cable together. So I got a VGA cable because they're abundant, cheap. Cut off one end, cut it short, but cut off one end, and put a female SCART on there, and a gender bender in the centre there to join the two VGA males together, and that's pretty much it. In simplified terms, that's it. Now, so there's probably 3 issues in dealing with connecting to the matrix switches from Extron. One is, of course, the plugs types, which I've just showed you what I do to get from console plug to B and C. Then there's the sync issue. The matrix switches like composite sync for their sync. They do not like composite video for the sync. So you must clean the sync up or get composite sync from your console. I've actually got a sync stripper inside this SCART connector here I've made up. It fits in here. That's one of the benefits of the SCART hood plug. The hood's very big. You can fit bits and pieces in there. So that's how I overcome that. Some consoles you're lucky, they already do output composite sync, like the Dreamcast or Japanese Saturn or the Mega Drive or the Master System or the NTSC Super Nintendo. And then if you've had various consoles RGB modded, like the Nintendo 64 or the NES, they will provide you with composite sync through their mod kits. So you can overcome a lot. PS1 and 2, a bit more trickier. They don't output composite sync at all. You might be able to mod them from inside, but I've gone for an external modification there. So that's that. Also, your typical console cables generally use some components, some resistors or capacitors. The PlayStation does, uses 220 microfarad capacitors. That's fine in this cable here, they're just still in the SCART plug on the console SCART cable plug side of things, so that's easy. As far as audio is concerned and 5 volts, well, you know you've got your 5 volts that travels through your SCART cable typically, and that's used to power the sync separator. Now 5 volts doesn't go beyond. There's no provision in this BNC VGA cable for the 5 volts. The only need for 5 volts at the TV's end is to switch it into RGB mode on pin 16 of the SCART if your TV requires it. I will explain how I overcome that shortly, but as it is, there's no provision for the 5 volts going through the cable here. And for audio, I've broke out the audio. I've broke it out and gone separate. Again, there's no provision for audio in this VGA Extron cable, VGA BNC. I broke it out to its own cable and put that little Extron captive screw connector on there that goes into the back of the matrix switcher, so you can get sound into it that way. That plugs just for the matrix switcher. It'll only be used for that. One of the other things I'd like to point out too is if you've gotten into SCART RGB at some stage and you realise, well, this is heaps better than composite or svideo, but you become aware of an issue with sound when you get a picture on the screen, particularly a white screen, that you get a buzz through the audio, regardless if it's the television or a stereo setup. You get that buzz. Well, that's from interference from the video lines protruding into the audio lines. That's why you should have your cable shielded, even preferably to have the audio shielded from the video, not just shielding around the outer, but between, to divide those two, bit of shielding on both, or just one to separate it, and then maybe an outer shielding over the whole lot. But the other way is to separate the video from the audio like that, to give it more physical distance to keep away the interference. These cables, the VGA cable is pretty high quality, there's good shielding in that, and this cable here, the BNC VGA, is a mini coax, so again good shielding, but this PlayStation cable is very cheap. It does cause a lot of sound, a lot of picture noise gets into the audio, and because it is the weakest link in the chain, it will pass on that interference. It won't escape. It's not going to improve when it goes through this cable. It won't degrade any further, but it won't improve. So you really do need to use high quality, good quality SCART cables to avoid that, if that's an issue for you, if you find that annoying, that buzzing sound. So that's the old style cable that I was using. I've gone on to the Mark II, I suppose you could say, cable now. Here's what I'm using now, and this is again for the PlayStation, could be the one of the two. I've managed to acquire the PlayStation, the Sony PlayStation proprietary connector there, so I can make my cable straight from the ground up. I've omitted the SCART male and female plug. There's no SCART at all. There is still the VGA. I've still got to take good use of these VGA to BNC. They're too good not to use. So I don't really want to cut them either. I don't like to deface or cut up cables if I don't have to. So the challenge now is to incorporate the sync stripper, which I've done, and I've put a green sticker on there to mark that I've got the sync stripper in there, and that will fit. That's a VGA or DB9 or DB15 line plug that's got room inside it to fit your plug in, but also a bit of space, and you can fit the sync stripper in there. Also, for the 220 UF capacitors, I've actually managed to fit the 3 inside the PlayStation plug. So I've overcome the component problems, the problem of fitting them somewhere, by just putting them inside the plug cases. The audio again breaks out into its own separate lead, and I've heat shrunk the audio to the video cable just to keep it tidy and together. It's better than cable ties. Cable ties tend to, they're still quite good to use, but cable ties are more prone to getting caught on things because of the head of them, whereas the heat shrink is much smoother, tidier. Here at the end, because we only need red, green, blue and sync, or composite sync, I've got the 5th BNC and just tied it back again. I don't need it for now, but I don't want to get rid of it in case I rehash the cables in the future. So these, the BNC to VGA cable is intended for VGA, matrix switching type stuff like that, but it's for RGB HV PC style signal, but we're just using it for RGBS here. So we only need the 4. So if I bring that matrix switcher back, bring the camera up, and one of the other considerations you might want to make now, this matrix switcher is pretty big. It's a 32 input, if I haven't already mentioned that. But what you need to take into consideration if you're going to use a big matrix switcher is you need some fairly decent length on the cabling here at the end of your cable. So for example, you want to plug in your red into the red section, red number 1, green number 2, blue number 3, and then you sync into there, and the sync, composite sync. That's all good and well, but what you need is a bit of length in the cable to actually reach, and length in the audio cable too to get down to the bottom where the blue inputs are for audio. See, if you've got a cable, I'll find it for you now. If you've got a cable that's got short strands at the end like that, it's not going to be enough. Not on a big matrix switcher. Not going to be enough to reach. So just be mindful of that. If you've got an 8 input or a 16, you might get away with it, but a 32, you're much more or less likely to fall into the trap if you don't have long enough lengths there. So that's the typical cable that I'm going to run with now. And another reason to omit that SCART as well is because, let's say you've got heaps of these cables behind your entertainment unit, whatever it is, and you want to put a new console in, you're going to pull your switcher sideways, whatever, it's going to yank the cables, and it's very, very easy for a SCART socket, male and female, to split apart. I would advise putting some tape around the plug to hold it together in the center there, the 2 plugs together. Put some insulation tape around it to hold it together. But ideally, say I made a 3rd revision, if I could afford it, I would have the plug, mini coax cable, 6 strand, red, green, blue, sync, audio left, audio right, and then just one cable all the way to the BNCs with no plugs and sockets. 1, because it's cheaper to not have to use plugs and sockets. 2, these can get caught on things and separate, and really they are the weakest link in the cable, plugs and sockets that disconnect, and you lose picture of sound, and then you're in trouble and you've got to get around the back and try and figure out things, and it's a bit of a headache. So that's why you really need your cabling as good as you can when you start dealing with a lot of cables. So I'll show you another cable I've made. This time it's svideo. It's quite a long one, and it's for the Commodore 64 in this case. DIN, 8-pin DIN. I've cut a couple DINs out of the plug end to fit that aren't needed. You know, there are what I would say the standard 8-pin male plugs and the 8-pin plugs that are the horseshoe type that are used on the Mega Drive and the Master System and the Commodore 64. Well, I didn't have any of those left, so you can use a regular 8-pin and just cut the 2 top pins out, or melt them out, whatever, and you can fit it in. There's a 300 ohm resistor on the chroma line inside again. It's easy to fit in there in that DIN. The cable is an S-Video Pro cable, as it's called. It's a bit higher grade than a standard cable. It's intended for S-Video. There's two coaxes inside. I suppose, no, strictly speaking, they might not be coax, but for all intents and purposes I call them that. I've got a single cable there, single shielded cable for the audio. Commodore 64 is mono, so that's fine. Again, they're heat shrunk together, just every 15 centimeters or so. About 2.5 meters long, this cable. There's your end of the cable. It's again nice long strands to get it spread apart nicely for the matrix switcher, audio, and the captive screw, Extron captive screw there. It's mono, but it's doubled over, so it's in left and right, but just mono, dual mono, whatever you want to call it. It's easier to plug this up. doesn't require anything too special. I would say go with the colours when you're plugging up S-Video. Don't plug the chroma or the luma into the sync. You might be able to do it, but just even by putting it into the colours here, just ignore that they're intended only for red and only for blue. I think they just let whatever pass through. So just put one on the green and one on the red and one on the green, or whichever combination, but just avoid the syncs. So that's pretty straightforward with S-Video. I just pulled a bit of the heat shrink off there. I'll do that. As for composite video, composite's pretty easy. All you need is BNC to RCA. Just be warned though, these cheap ones off eBay, the pin in the center, say you put the plug into the socket and then pull the plug out, sometimes the pin gets pulled out of these cheapo plugs and it's left stuck in your female BNC, and it's not easy to get out, trust me. But all you have to do is just put one in for your composite input, and then do the vice versa, the same for your output to your TV or whatever display. Easy. Composites, no worries at all. They're cheap, you know, a couple of bucks. Easy. And you do this for a component as well. Say your PS2 or your GameCube with red, green and blue, the component cables. There's 3 of these to go for the input and then 3 out. And same deal. So they're quite easy. It's really just RGB-S from the consoles that is the most difficult to do. VGA is easy. You saw the cable I had, it's 5 BNCs straight up, you know, horizontal sync, vertical sync, easy, piece of cake. Right, so that's the input side taken care of. Right, I'll go to the output and I'll show you the output S-Video cable. So this is going to go to my television. So it carries the signal out of the matrix switcher and to the television. So it connects to the matrix switcher again by more BNCs, nice long length there, chroma and luma, and the grounds are on the outside. Okay, on all these cables, the ground is on the outside. It's the shell of the BNC plug. And while I think of it, I'll go back and just explain something here. So, hang on. So just talking about the ground again. The beauty of VGA, the VGA plug and socket, is a lot of pins, and a lot of pins in the VGA plug are dedicated to ground. There's say maybe 5 or 6, so you can get your one ground that you might only get from your console's plug end, and then you can wire it to one pin and then spread it across say 5 or 6 pins. That way you get all your grounds to your BNC outers here. It's a good system to get all that ground spread. These cables are wired up automatically, like you've got red ground, blue ground, green ground and other grounds. That's all wired and ready done inside. So that's just how it's done. That's how it's done in that standard. So grounding is not too much of a challenge with that VGA connecting system there. Now back to the S-Video. Right. So explained. That's the matrix switcher in, and then it goes to the TV simply with an S-Video plug on the end. That's a fairly good quality S-Video plug. It's about $4, better than your standard plastic one. It's got a nice opening there for this particular cable, this S-Video Pro stuff. By the way, you can buy this at JCar Electronics. JCar are an electronics parts retailer here in Australia. They've got this cable on special for 66 cents a metre. It might be a cable that's discontinued, so get it while you can. That's less than half its normal price, so it's good value. So that's your S-Video, easy. And lastly, I'll show you this other cable. This is where things get a bit different again. So we want to go to the TV, to the SCART TV with SCART cable with BNC on one end, red, green, blue and sync. This is a very thick cable. This is a coax cable I bought from JCar as well, discontinued. It's very thick though, very thick, bit almost too thick. And it's a 5 line, 5 core. I've got that 5th wire again just tied back. It's not in use for anything, but I'm not going to cut it up in case I'm going to rehash it for something. So that goes to your SCART connector, which I've got down here, and that puts it into proportion. You can see how thick the cable is. It only just fits inside the SCART plug, the little hood, the little cap, the screw cap that keeps things tight, they typically taper at the back here and get narrower. Well, I've had to cut all the taper off so it would fit the cable into it. And you might see this other little cable here. This is where things get a little bit funny. You heard me mention before about 5 volts to the television. A lot of televisions need pin 16, I think it is, of the SCART connector. They need that to activate RGB mode in the TV. Some TVs don't need it, some SCART ones, but some do. And in case the one I'm using, the Grundigs typically do, you need some voltage present on pin 16. So what I've actually done is wired in a low DC adapter to do that. This is like 3 volts or so, and I've just wired it in. I've put the negative to ground and the positive to pin 16. I've got a resistor in there as well for it, but I've been running that for months and months and months like that, and it works fine. So that's how I do that. I know it's somewhat of an awkward cable, but it's very high grade coax cable there, and it's like the master cable running from the switcher to the TV. When you've got so many cables and power leads crossing over one another, I don't think shielding hurts it. So that's pretty much it. I know I would have forgotten some things, and you probably got more questions, so just leave it in the comment section. But that's basically how I hook things up. Haven't done it yet. This is what I've just finished, making all these new cables, tested them one by one. They work really well. Buzzing audio problems nearly completely eliminated or severely reduced, and I'm not getting colours dropping out and things. You know, good firm contacts where things aren't going to separate apart. You need to consider it when you've got a big cabling job. So thanks for watching. I've got more monitors and TVs and things to show, so just stay tuned and see you next time. Bye.